This is Daytona Speedway, the sacred ground of the Daytona 500, famously known as the Great American Race. Since 1959, fans have flocked here, drawn by the allure of watching drivers cheat death at nearly 200 miles per hour. This is the story of the 1989 Daytona 500, where fans saw one of the biggest gambles in the history of NASCAR.
This is the track that has launched 1,000 dreams, and this is the spot that has seen many of those dreams shattered.
In many sports, the most important game comes at the end of the season, but NASCAR has its Super Bowl at the beginning. Winning the Daytona 500 doesn't crown you NASCAR champion, but many drivers would trade a championship for a victory at Daytona Beach. The very first Daytona 500 was a spectacle, won by Lee Petty, who narrowly defeated Johnny Beauchamp in a finish so close it took officials 3 days to declare the winner. Photographs and newsreel footage had to be meticulously analyzed. For his victory, Petty took home $19,050, equivalent to about $190,000 today. But Lee Petty wasn't the only Petty in that historic race. His son Richard also participated in the original Daytona 500. Due to engine trouble, Richard Petty finished 57th out of a field of 59 drivers. Yet this setback was merely a prelude to greatness. Richard would go on to win 200 races throughout his illustrious career and secure 7 championships, earning him the title the King of NASCAR. By 1989, however, it had been 10 years since Richard Petty had won a championship, and he hadn't won the Daytona 500 since 1981. He started the race that day in 34th place, a provisional spot awarded to him based on points he had scored as a car owner the previous season. As the 1980s came to a close, it seemed as though the King's reign was nearing an end. Last year's race had been won by Bobby Allison, and the second-place finisher that year was Allison's son, Davey. Bobby Allison had been competing in NASCAR since 1961, and although he wasn't the king, it could be argued that Allison had just as much of an impact on the sport as Richard Petty. Back in 1979, Bobby, his brother Donnie Allison, and driver Cale Yarborough were involved in an incident at that year's Daytona 500. On the final lap, Yarborough and Donnie crashed into each other. Bobby finished the race, then drove over to check on his brother. Yarborough ran over to Bobby and accused him of causing the wreck, which led to a fist fight between the two men. Video of the fight was played on local TV stations across the country and widely discussed in the news. This brought new attention to NASCAR. Up until this time, stock car racing was mostly popular in the Deep South, but this fight and the discussion it started introduced many new fans to the sport. Unfortunately, Bobby Allison would not get a chance to compete at this year's Daytona. Over the summer, Bobby was involved in a serious accident at Pocono Raceway. On lap 1, he struck the track barrier and was then T-boned by another driver. He had to be flown to a local hospital, and his injuries were so severe that Allison was initially pronounced dead. Although he survived, Allison's injuries prevented him from ever racing full-time again.
Well, he ended up with what they call a closed head injury, and he was like right on the verge of death. With a head injury, you got to relearn everything all over again. Go to the bathroom to brush your teeth. I mean, you go right back to being a baby, and you just have to relearn everything all over again.
I was conscious, but I wasn't hooked up. I didn't really know what was going on, and I have no memory of anything during that period of time yet today.
Bobby's son Davey wanted to win the 1989 Daytona race as a tribute to his father. However, despite qualifying second the year before, Davey would be starting much farther back in 16th position.
Fingers crossed for us. You have a brand new car here, the new design 89 T-Bird. Can you put it out front today?
Well, we went out and practiced yesterday, and the car ran really good. It handled real well. Horsepower-wise, we're maybe off a little bit, but we ain't giving up until this thing's over with. And we want to put this Texaco Have One Star Thunderbird over there in Victory Lane, where Dad's Miller Buick was last year.
In addition to dealing with his father's health, Davey also had other problems at home. NASCAR had taken a toll on Davey's marriage, and he and his wife Deborah had recently gotten divorced. The man starting on the pole for the race was Ken Schrader. Although he had been racing for several years, Schrader had only recently gotten his first victory. Coincidentally, Schrader had also started on the pole at last year's Daytona 500, but had been quickly overtaken by the Allisons and had to settle for 6th place. Starting second was Darrell Waltrip, a 3-time Cup Series champion. Despite winning 12 consecutive victories at Bristol Speedway in the early 80s and multiple other wins at NASCAR's most prestigious tracks, Waltrip had never won the Daytona 500. This would be his 17th attempt. Another driver that everyone had their eyes on was Dale Earnhardt. Like Waltrip, he was a 3-time champion who had never won a Daytona 500. He would be starting in 8th place. In 1989, Bill Elliott, the defending NASCAR champion, was the face of the year's promotional materials. He had previously won the Daytona 500 twice and held the Daytona qualifying record. 2 years ago, he finished a lap at Daytona with an average speed of 210.4 miles per hour, a record that will never be broken, because NASCAR won't let it.
Oh, we have a problem. Bobby Allison with a horrible crash here on the front stretch. It has torn out a complete...
As cars began reaching higher speeds at NASCAR's 2 biggest tracks, Daytona and Talladega, officials grew concerned about driver safety. In response to a crash involving Bobby Allison at the 1987 Talladega race, which was ultimately won by Bobby's son Davey, NASCAR introduced the restrictor plate. This device limits engine power to reduce speeds and enhance safety. As a result, these drivers will never reach 210 miles per hour again. Despite his success at Daytona and his status as NASCAR's poster boy, Elliott entered the 1989 Daytona 500 knowing he wouldn't be able to win. During a practice session, he broke his wrist. To ensure that his team still earned points, Elliott entered the race, but then was immediately replaced by backup driver Jody Ridley.
And now for the most famous words in motorsports, Mr. Dick Stegemeyer.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
Even though he started on the pole, Ken Schrader was quickly overtaken by Darrell Waltrip, who led the first lap. Throughout the grueling 200-lap race, there were 30 lead changes among 15 different drivers. However, in NASCAR and racing in general, it's not about how many laps you lead, it's about leading the final one. After just 3 laps, driver Neil Bonnett's car would catch on fire, bringing out the first caution. It was under this caution that Bill Elliott chose to make a pit stop so that Jody Ridley could take over as the driver of his car for the remainder of the race.
Battle for the lead developing, going into turn number 1. Schrader on the outside. The man who won the pole, who won the Busch Clash on CBS last week. And Waltrip is falling back a bit. Marlin taking second.
Yeah, you wonder if Waltrip might have some sort of a problem. He is definitely off the pace.
Waltrip's time at the front was short-lived as Schrader quickly regained the lead and went on to dominate, leading a total of 114 laps, more than half the race. Typically, such domination by a single driver might make for a dull day, but as you'll soon see, the ending of this race was anything but boring.
And it's quite heavy.
70. Oh, car in trouble. It's Jody Ridley. The number 9 car has crashed to the back straightaway. 84, Mike Alexander has crashed. Here's Jody Ridley trying to get it fired. Dale Jarrett getting tagged there, right in front, and several more cars.
Jody Ridley, Bill Elliott's replacement driver, crashed on lap 72 in a multi-car accident, narrowly avoided by Darrell Waltrip. In total, 10 drivers never finished the race. A few laps after the wreck, Waltrip raced his way back to the lead with his rival Dale Earnhardt right behind him, while Ken Schrader was nowhere in sight. Two former NASCAR champions, two of the best drivers in the world, and two competitors who would do anything to win, but neither had ever won a Daytona 500. Then, from out of nowhere, Schrader made a comeback.
On the All-Pro circuit, Bob Harmon's group, and he's won the championship the last 2 years.
Look at Schrader come to the inside and move his way up to third.
Earnhardt would make his move down to the bottom of the racetrack, and Schrader would follow him, pushing Earnhardt past Waltrip, giving the Intimidator the lead.
For just a moment and then got a run, and here he goes. Now Earnhardt making the pass for the lead.
A cluster of Chevrolets up in front. Earnhardt for first, Schrader for second, Waltrip back to third.
But Earnhardt's lead would prove to be short-lived, as Schrader quickly took the lead back, and Darrell Waltrip took second place, pushing Earnhardt back to third. Over the next near 100 laps, Schrader would continue to dominate, and Waltrip would end up falling farther back. With less than 20 laps to go, Schrader and Earnhardt had pulled so far away from the rest of the pack that it seemed like no other driver had any hope of winning the race.
The two leaders, using that draft, have been able to snap the whip and drop him off, and he has fallen way back from Schrader and Earnhardt, who are sparring to decide how this 500 will be decided. There you see them, both looking for their first 500 victory. Ken Schrader in the number 25, and the man in black, Dale Earnhardt, three-time Winston.
As the race approached the final laps, both Schrader and Earnhardt realized that they were running low on fuel and would soon need to make pit stops. It seemed the race would no longer be decided on the track, but rather by which driver's pit crew was the fastest.
On the 2.5-mile high banks of the Daytona Speedway. But shortly, it will be decided on pit road. That's where this race will probably reach its conclusion. One of these cars will make a pit stop just a quick second before the other, and that will make the difference.
Their strategy was to remain on the track as long as possible and only pit at the last moment. The longer Earnhardt and Schrader could stay out, the less fuel they would need to take on, minimizing their time on pit road.
Schrader and Earnhardt both pitting, coming in at the identical time. Leaderboard shows 11 laps to go. Here's Dave Despain.
Schrader and Earnhardt finally made a pit stop with 11 laps to go, and it would be Earnhardt who managed to get out first. But both of them had a surprise waiting when they got back on the track.
There's the leader, Kulwicki. He has not pitted as yet.
No, it has Darrell Waltrip.
Alan Kulwicki, a driver we haven't discussed yet, and Darrell Waltrip chose not to pit. After calculating their fuel needs, they believed that by driving conservatively, they could finish the race without needing extra fuel. As a result, the race shifted from a battle of speed to a contest of fuel efficiency. Alan Kulwicki, the 1986 Rookie of the Year, had only recently secured his first victory at Phoenix a few months ago.
This fellow Kulwicki didn't care that much about this Daytona track, but his style of driving, that conservative style of driving, may be paying off here.
With just 6 laps to go, Alan Kulwicki, a driver many had counted out, suddenly found himself with a real chance at victory, while the prospects of everyone else continued to dwindle. With just 4 laps to go, Kulwicki and Waltrip remained at the top, but Schrader and Earnhardt were quickly closing in.
Kulwicki dives onto pit road. Alan Kulwicki brings the number 7 down. It's over for him.
With just 2 laps to go, Alan Kulwicki runs out of gas. Now, all eyes are on Darrell Waltrip. Will he make it, or will he suffer the same fate as Kulwicki?
Hoping, praying that car will just pick up enough gas to go these last laps.
Well, after 17 attempts and 3 championships, Darrell Waltrip crossed the finish line in first place and won his first ever Daytona 500.
Number 25. Schrader will take second. 7 seconds back, almost 8. And right behind him comes Dale Earnhardt.
I won the Daytona 500. I won the Daytona 500.
Darrell, how long?
Wait. This is the Daytona 500, isn't it?
You bet.
Don't tell me it isn't.
Darrell Waltrip would never win another Daytona 500, But in 2001, his little brother, Michael Waltrip, would win his first Daytona 500.
Michael Waltrip wins.
All right. It's a television dream come true.
While this race was the first win of Michael Waltrip's career, it would be the last race of Dale Earnhardt, Darrell's longtime rival. Many people forget that the crash that took Earnhardt's life also involved another car, and although he isn't responsible for the accident, that car was driven by none other than Ken Schrader, the man who got the pole and led the most laps back in 1989.
This is undoubtedly one of the toughest announcements that I've ever personally had to make. But after the accident in Turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt.
Earnhardt would finally win the Daytona 500 in 1998, capturing a total of 7 championships in his career. His son, Dale Earnhardt Jr., would also have an outstanding career in NASCAR. Bobby Allison would never race professionally again, and tragically, his son Davey died in a helicopter crash in 1993. Alan Kulwicki, the man who ran out of gas just 2 laps away from winning the race, went on to win the 1992 championship. However, while defending his championship in 93, Kulwicki was killed in a plane crash. Kulwicki, who had studied engineering, managed his own team and brought a scientific approach to racing that has had a lasting impact on how teams are run today. After retiring from racing, Darrell Waltrip found a new career as a color commentator. His brother Michael Waltrip went on to win the Daytona 500 for a second time in 2003. In total, Michael Waltrip won only 4 races in his entire career, far fewer than the 84 victories his older brother earned. However, he will always be able to boast that he won twice as many Daytona 500s as his older brother.